All right, chat. I wanted to get back to Noah. We didn't finish Noah Samsen yesterday. I would have finished Noah Samsen just absolutely crushing Destiny, Ethan Klein, the slop YouTubers. What's very funny is that Ethan Klein had to say that, well, it's not defamation to say that Destiny supports the genocide because he said it. I love Noah Samsen, chat. You know, at the very, very beginning of Noah Samsen's career, I was slow to the Noah Samsen train, right? I was slow to the Noah Samsen train because he started making videos as a really young guy. And, you know, I think that as the years have gone by, his politics have just matured and improved and gotten better and better and better.
Being a refugee does not enshrine upon you some right to steal other people's land and make them refugees. That's what the settlement of Israel was, and any equivocation between that and other factors is a direct rhetorical justification for the crime.
The very premise behind it is obviously flawed, and presenting the partition plan as if it was not clearly a grave injustice is a rhetorical trick to then sort of implant this idea that what Israel did was legitimate. They were just abiding by the plan, apparently, even though they broke every single thing that was stipulated in it, and that it is the fault of the Palestinians for rejecting obviously untenable things like this, rather than just giving up more than half of their country to new arrivals for their own exclusive use. And it's especially ironic that Zionists love to cite the partition plan as somehow legitimizing when they reject, like, literally every other UN prescription or decision, binding or not, ever made on the subject of Israel-Palestine aside from it.
The last main point on Ethan's support of the genocide in Gaza is his effort to delegitimize resistance to that genocide. He spends a good deal of time in his video going after Hezbollah and Ansar Allah, literally calling them the bad guys.
All right, so these guys are clearly the bad guys.
I feel like I already touched on this a bit in this video and the last one, but what struck me about this section was just the brazen lies about these groups, spreading the ridiculous claim that Hezbollah is responsible for the entirety of the death toll of the Syrian civil war, while also changing all of those deaths, which included combatants, to civilians, and accusing them of genocide.
They participated in the slaughter of over 500,000 Syrian civilians, and they killed hundreds of thousands of civilians in what can only be described as a genocide.
No one does this. I don't know where this came from, but it's just legitimately a bizarre claim to make. Or his false claims about the Houthis, that the hostages taken from the Galaxy leader had not been seen or heard from since the genocide began.
I'd like to remind everybody that the crew that's kidnapped in this video has been missing for over a year now, with zero updates on their health, whereabouts, or anything. That lines up with leftist values.
That's not true. They were confirmed to be in good health by visits from humanitarian organizations, or just lying about the nature of their attacks, as if the Houthis are attacking these ships for any reason other than what they're doing it for, which is to stop Israel's genocide.
The Houthis have been extremely explicit and repeat on an almost daily basis their attacks on ships in the Red Sea will stop as soon as the Gaza war ends and humanitarian and other supplies are allowed into Gaza, and therefore the Palestinians will no longer be under the threat and the horrors that you've earlier described and that most of us have seen on our screens for many, many weeks. The important thing is that although the US and the UK claim that they're only defending free movement in the Red Sea and refuse to accept any connection between this and the war in Gaza, for the Houthis, it's absolutely straightforward and explicit that, number one, they're only targeting ships that have any connection with Israel, whether they're going to Israel, coming from Israel, delivering stuff owned by Israelis or whatever, any connection, whatever. And that other ships are not targeted, except, of course, now, since the US and UK strikes have started, they are also targeting US and UK ships.
Also evident in the fact that during the ceasefire, quote-unquote
ceasefire,
that Israel violated over.
Noah did a video hangout with his Patreon supporters last week, and I attended, and it was an intimate group. He was so kind, open, and down to earth. Tell him to be my friend.
1,000 times. The Houthis stopped the attacks, and they only started them up again when Israel started completely starving out the Gaza Strip, fully restricting aid. And in defiance of the starvation blockade, the US and the Saudis started bombing in Yemen and killing children. So if you want to stop Israel from killing children, the US will kill your children. That's basically the conclusion of that sequence of events. It bears repeating here, Hezbollah and Ansar Allah are the only groups in the world that have provided aid to the Palestinian resistance against Israel's genocide. That's a fact. Citing their status as US-designated terrorist groups or historical examples of their violations of international law does not change that fact. If we acknowledge the fact that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza, which Ethan, or at least his fans, seem to believe he does, then it must also be recognized that the international community is legally obligated under the Genocide Convention to employ all means necessary to prevent said genocide. When it comes to Israel's genocide in Gaza, these terrorists here are the only ones following the law, the only ones operating with any sort of moral compass.
All states are obliged to do everything in their power to stop this genocide from continuing in Palestine. Who has actually done that? South Africa, when they brought Israel to trial in the International Court of Justice for genocide. I've said arguably Hezbollah, not a state, but it is a significant actor in that state because it has engaged Israeli forces militarily, initially in territory illegally occupied by Israeli forces, the Shebaa farms in South Lebanon, to draw Israeli assets away from the genocide. And the third one that you mentioned very significantly, Yemen, under Houthi control. The Houthis, Ansar Allah, they announced in response to Israel's genocide in Palestine that it would block shipping into the Red Sea that was headed to resupply the Israeli regime as long as it continues the siege and the genocide in Gaza. And it's been using this choke point at the head of the Red Sea called Bab el-Mandeb, which means the Gate of Tears, in this narrow strait between Yemen and Djibouti at the opening of the Red Sea. And they started this targeted partial blockade in November of 2023 when the genocide started by boarding an Israeli ship, and then they sustained the blockade until the announcement of the most recent so-called ceasefire. At that moment, the Houthis lifted the blockade while the ceasefire was going on, demonstrating that they were doing this as a humanitarian intervention in order to meet what the International Court of Justice has said is the responsibility of all states, and what the General Assembly in its implementing resolution has confirmed is the responsibility of all states to do everything in their power to stop the genocide and the siege that was being imposed on Gaza. You know, some ships avoided the blockade by sailing around Africa, but most of them couldn't. So the major shipping companies stopped sailing to the Red Sea, and the port of Eilat in Israel went bankrupt, which means that this blockade was working. It was denying the Israeli regime many of the goods that it needed to continue the siege and to continue the genocide in Palestine.
The United States, aka the terrorist designators, meanwhile, are the ones doing the terrorism. They are aiding and abetting a genocide with billions of dollars in arms shipments to Israel. The liberal framework of thought is only able to conceptualize actors in conflict as being good and bad. Israel's far-right government is bad, Ethan says, but so are terrorists. Genocide is bad. I don't agree with genocide, of course, but hijacking ships is bad too. It's against the law, which is bad. Everybody should just stop doing bad stuff. Okay, well, Israel's not stopping. They're not stopping the genocide. The US is not stopping its arms shipments so that Israel can continue that genocide. That is the material reality. If you actually want that genocide to stop, you need to do something material to try to stop it. And so far in the world, the only people doing that outside of Gaza militarily are Hezbollah and Ansar Allah. If you spend all your time attacking these groups while sitting on the sidelines, idealistically opining on what forms of resistance are acceptable to you, then you're supporting the genocide. Full stop. There's something to be said here about the basic attack on free speech evident in this campaign. They want to deplatform Hassan for interviewing a Yemeni teenager on the grounds that they believe this teenager is a member of Ansar Allah or the Houthis, a US designated terrorist group, and that Hassan didn't just interview him, but he promoted him. Glazing is the legal term they use, I believe.
It started with Hassan platforming Houthi terrorists. This kid is a rampant anti-Semite and a violent Houthi terrorists.
But he literally had a terrorist on a stream. This wasn't really an interview. It was like a glorified promotion reel.
Glorifying a terrorist live on stream. This man does not critically apply any form of journalism.
Hassan did not ask him one critical question. In fact, the opposite. It was a complete puff piece where he sucked him off, elevated him, was uncritical.
None of this is true. Ethan provided no credible evidence to the claim that Rashid al-Haddad, or Tim Houthi Chalamet, the nickname of the Yemeni teenager, is a member of Ansar Allah. And in their interview, Hassan asked multiple questions that were critical of Rashid.
I don't know if he can answer this or not, but as far as the Ansar Allah militancy goes, like as far as the standing military goes, like I don't know if he is allowed to speak on this. I don't know if he's like actually a part of the groups at all or just like simply a TikToker. You know what I mean? I don't know how to ask that in the best way possible though.
طيب يعني بقول لك يعني أنا يمني يعني كيمني يعني أنا واقف إلى جانب فلسطين.
His answer is a Yemeni who stands with Palestine.
In America, some of the like leading groups that are pro-Palestine are led by Jewish people who are anti-Israel. How does he feel about that?
والله يعني صراحة أي واحد يدعم فلسطين إحنا معه.
He's saying anyone that supports Palestine, we're with.
Hell yeah.
But even if that hadn't happened, and even if he were a member of the Houthis, calling for deplatforming on those grounds is a basic violation of free speech.
It was very frustrating to see that because like there is journalistic value to interviewing every single person. People have interviewed Osama bin Laden. I was trying to make him comfortable in that conversation because I didn't know if he was a Houthi or not. I thought he might be, right? So I wanted to make him as comfortable as possible. And then, yes, the conversation trajectory probably would have changed a little bit if he had said he was a Houthi. He said he was not. And I was inclined to believe him. There's no reason for me not to. But even in that process, they still asked him about like his thoughts on Jewish people, anti-Semitism and the like.
They wanted to deplatform Hassan for watching an Ansar Allah music video on his stream. They claim that this is terrorist promotion, watching unfettered terrorist propaganda, as they claimed. But the question here is, what level of denunciation and condemnation would be required during Hassan's viewing of that video in order for it to clear the bar of a valid viewing of a piece of political media? The mere existence on the screen of a video from the Houthis is enough to trigger that post 9/11 war on terror response in the American viewer, to the point that they're willing to just call for his banning for making such violent and evil threats like Yemeni people are a musical people, or these songs function as an act of resistance against the US-backed Saudi genocide.
Instead of terrorist propaganda, let's call it musicals.
They do musicals.
Instead of violent jihadists, let's call them musically talented people.
They're very musical people.
It is precisely this line of argument that the US government and the Trump administration have taken when it comes to the illegal kidnapping and detention of Palestinian activist Mahmoud.
It's important to understand that Ethan Klein is just a whiny little bitch boy. Like, that's a very important thing to understand about Ethan Klein is, you know, basically Benjamin Netanyahu came and gave a speech to the joint session of Congress, and he was getting standing ovations by both political parties as we spend hundreds of billions of dollars giving him weapons to kill kids, right? And Ethan Klein is focusing on the idea that a Yemeni teenager was on Hassan's stream, and then that same teenager went on the BBC and went all over mainstream media. There's no like, and he thinks that's the big grand argument that makes sense. And the thing about Ethan Klein is like, Ethan, we know you don't care about this shit. We know that you don't care about the killing of Palestinian kids. We know you're a supremacist. We know that. We know you're a racist. We know you've said it many times. We're not confused. And everybody, like, you know, the reality is anybody of any kind of moral, without any kind of moral sense is going to hate your fucking ass. And your alliance is going to be with Donald Trump, slop YouTube centrists, and Asmongold.
Khalil. He is not charged with a crime. He is being silenced for his speech on the grounds that it constitutes terrorist promotion. As this sort of terrorism.
Wait, what's this? Ethan Klein's newest tattoo: the greatest thing a man can do for his children is to love their mother. Such a bizarrely transactional message, like something a guy gets in last ditch to save his marriage before murdering his entire family. That's a little bit extreme right there, Queen in Yellow. But is this true? The greatest thing a man can do for his children is love their mother? What the fuck? That's like a hostage video statement. Also, did she get a tattoo of him? heard she got a new tattoo. I thought it might be of him.
Is a threat to U.S. national security, according to the U.S. This is grounds for detention.
What's up, Gondok? What's up, brother? Why do you want me to notice you? What do you want me to notice you about? The easiest way to get noticed is for you to type things that I want to read.
The terrorism in question here is, of course, advocating against the genocide. Whether it's the US-backed genocide of Palestinians in Gaza or the US-backed genocide of the people of Yemen through its crippling blockade that has resulted in the starvation of hundreds of thousands of people, or its indiscriminate bombing campaign that has killed tens of thousands more, in both of these places, the justification is fighting terrorism. When the US-backed Saudi coalition blows up a school bus full of school children, the justification they use is that they were targeting the Houthis.
It was an attack which drew international condemnation and left the parents of 40 children crying over their graves. Initially, the Saudi-led coalition claimed the attack was a justified military operation. It was targeting Houthi leaders. Now, it says, it made mistakes.
When Israel blows up a hospital, lighting medical tents on fire and burning Palestinians alive, the justification they're using is fighting terrorism. It's all part of this same system, and whether on the ground in Gaza or on the airwaves of media coverage of it, the premise itself of terrorism needs to be challenged. Which is why when you release a video for 3 million people attacking resistance to genocide as terrorism,
terrorist groups, terrorist propaganda, terrorism, terrorist organization,
you're sort of doing that same thing. The last point for today's video I want to bring up is the concept of deflecting criticism. Ethan implies that my decision to criticize him or character assassinate and
it's the story about the Turkish grad student who got black bagged and Boston by ICE. She had allegedly had written an op-ed about Tufts to BDS Israel. Yeah, basically what's happening right now is the Zionist organizations in this country are creating lists of any American or a resident of this country they can who criticizes Israel so that the Trump administration could use state power to repress them for a foreign state. This is treason. It is treasonous to be a Zionist organization that is doing this. And I think it betrays Judaism, the grand tradition of Judaism that we all love. It's just, it's sad. One thing that anti-Semites and right-wingers point out a lot is that when you look at libertarian organizations throughout the world, that Jews are always prominent leaders and members of those groups. And it's because being a Jewish person in Western society gives you a separateness, a position of being a little bit of a stranger, right? And so that gives you the personal experience that helps you build and grow empathy and believe in the individual value of every person, even if they don't, perfectly align with the average person or the status quo. And to now have these organizations of the Israeli state hijacking and using the Holocaust and the trauma that Jewish people have suffered all through the world so that they could effectuate a genocide. It's fucking disgusting. The video is horrifying.
And horrifically lie about him, as he put it, is tied to Hassan being my idol and my idol being criticized.
I don't understand why the anti-Semitic right wing is so loving of Israel. The answer is that they're white supremacists and they're racist, and they want to create a precedent of ethno-states, right? So, and anti-Semitism is also useful because they hate Jews. So if they support Israel and they build anti-Semitism abroad, that can influence Jews to flee to Israel. And then that gives them a model to be like, look, did Jews have an ethno-state? Why can't we have an ethno-state? Right? And the fascist right wing in Israel, they ally with anti-Semites abroad because they want to create that climate of fear in the Jewish community and the diaspora. And so it's a perfect circular. They both help each other, you know, and a lot. And by the way, the people in power in Israel right now are fascists. So it's fascists aligning with fascists to accomplish their domestic goals. It's not very complicated.
Compelled me to defend him, seemingly against logic or reason or something like that. This was an accusation shared by many of the viewers of my video. Hassan Glazer detected, opinion rejected. Now, what's interesting is that this response simply reinforces my point about the Hassan bad online media ecosystem. To these people, responding to my arguments on their own merit is unnecessary because they can simply write me off as de facto wrong because I am defending Hassan, who is de facto wrong because Hassan bad. It is not the actual political...
Exactly. And that's the way that right-wingers always argue. Right-wingers try to create data voids. Basically, the idea is a right-winger will take somebody, personally attack them, create a bunch of like an effluvia of controversy around them so that people just don't even listen to what they say, right? Because the right wing can't argue points. They can't argue points. That's why Asmongold is afraid of me. That's why Asmongold is afraid of Hassan. He can't talk about this shit. That's why he can only do, all he could do is take clips out of context and say, they're encouraging violence. Whereas if encouraging violence got you banned, he would have been perma'd. And like, so that's the whole point. It's a very, very pathetic standard tactic. We've known about it for literally decades at this point. And it is I think this is the project. I think this is a good explanation of it. Hold on, I'm finding it, chat. Oh, damn, that's not the video. Fuck, I'll have to find it.
Issue I'm defending him on that they're able to challenge. The issue, of course, being opposing Israel's genocide in Gaza and informing viewers about the resistance to that genocide without screaming, I condemn terrorism into the microphone for every second of that coverage. No, it's not that. It is the mere fact that Hassan is on the screen while I make these points that seems to trigger this response. The response of completely ignoring the valid connections between Hassan's arguments and my own. It's cowardly, but expected, and only serves to strengthen my resolve in the notion that these people are not serious in their politics and therefore should not be taken seriously. The other major example of this sort of deflection is in regards to my citation of the YouTuber Bad Empanada. I can't tell you how many comments I received from people that decided to throw out all of the points made in my hour-long video in their entirety because at the start of it, I cited Bad Empanada's prior responses. None of these comments, and I mean not a single one out of the seemingly thousands of them, took the time to respond to, let alone debunk Bad Empanada's points about Ethan's video. So far, I haven't seen anyone do that or even try. Regardless of how you feel about Bad Empanada or what you think of his posts online, the facts are the facts. If you can't dispute them, then just say that and move on. Embrace your ignorance and your blind fandom because at least then you're not being a coward. You're just saying, yeah, I'm dumb. I'm a dumb idiot baby. I don't like Bad Empanada because he's mean to my favorite streamer. Okay, that's fine. That's the truth. There's a claim going around that Hassan being pro-Palestine does not make him immune from criticism.
One of the most cynical methods Hassan deploys to sidestep any criticism is to deflect to the ongoing genocide in Gaza. I've seen him do this so many times. He frames it like you are selfish for trying to criticize him, no matter what the reason is, because there's a genocide happening, man. How can you criticize me at a time like this?
In one way, this is true. Like, let's say Hassan walked up to you and stepped on your foot and you said, hey man, don't do that, ow. And he responded by saying, you're going to criticize me while there's an active genocide going on right now? Seriously? That would be an example of an invalid deflection from criticism. However, when the criticism in question is related to Hassan's support of Palestinians and advocacy against their genocide, and the criticism is coming from people who do not support that cause, then yes, it makes him immune. He doesn't have to take that criticism seriously. because it's coming in bad faith from people who are not allies to his cause. If criticism is coming from parties who have no stake in or solidarity with the mission of Palestinian liberation, these criticisms are irrelevant. They are beneath consideration. The people who levy these criticisms...
By the way, they're not even criticisms. They're not even criticisms. They're just excuses to say he's bad. It's like, first of all, if I wanted to have a terrorist on my stream and interview him, that's called free motherfucking speech. Who gives a shit? If I wanted to have a terrorist on my stream, just like when Destiny had Nazi Nick Fuentes on his stream and people said, wow, he's platforming this Nazi. And all you guys said free speech, right? That was free speech. It wasn't illegal. I thought it was really bad to have a Holocaust denier Nazi white supremacist on the stream and promote him as a good guy who he respects more than any leftist, right? But at the end of the day, that's free speech. Same thing with having a terrorist on this platform. That's free fucking speech. Now, if they go out there and they violate TOS, you can get banned for it. And because Twitch is a private platform, they get to ban people for violating their TOS. But as far as free speech, who gives a shit? I thought these guys were free speech absolutists. And it's very, very simple. This is the game they're playing, chat. This is the game they're playing. We've known about it for a decade now.
The running theme here is all these people who ostensibly want a frank exchange of ideas spend a lot more time making accusations than asking questions. Because why ask what you believe when they can tell you what you believe and make you correct them? And if you ever don't go to the trouble of correcting them, must be because they're right. And you're not naive, you see what's going on here. This isn't about conversation. No, this is about boxes. When you say something cogent that they don't agree with, and they get the sinking feeling that you might start making sense, they need a reason not to listen to you. So they reach for a box to stick you in. Dishonest feminism, fake progressivism, daddy issue liberalism. No one in those boxes is worth listening to. Which means, as long as they've got you in one, they're not at risk of having their minds changed. This whole thing isn't even an argument with you. Not really. They're presenting themselves with arguments for why they don't have to listen to you. So your first reflex is to defy their expectations. Actually, my dad was a draft-dodging hippie who told me he loved me every day. And I never said what genders my partners are, but I promise they're all feminists. As for my accent, actually, I don't know what to do with the accent thing, but the point is, I refuse to fit in your box. And if they can't put you in one, if they can't dismiss you outright, they'll have to engage with your argument. But if you've spent any time arguing with angry dudes...
By the way, dudes... That's what they do with me. They, you know, the box that Asmongold or they try to put me in is Mike's fat or Mike's cringe. Bro, you're an Asmongold or Destiny fan. Like, are you an Ethan Klein fan? Like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Dudes online, and it is mostly dudes. You know what I'm about to say. They don't. This accusatory, condescending attitude never falters, because a technique that has permeated anti-progressivism is to never play defense. Now don't get me wrong, what I said about the right fitting the left into simplified boxes as a way of preserving their own egos, I do think that's a thing, at least for many people much of the time. And I think the reassurance it brings is why the technique stays so popular. But that framing is about how individual people are feeling in isolated moments and leaves out the larger game that's being played. Because there is a long-term strategic value to never playing defense, and it's less to do with arguments than with attitude. From your perspective, this debate about the feminist is a joke. This guy doesn't know what he's talking about. He comes in hot without confirming any of his assumptions. The whole conversation is you repeatedly schooling an ignorant dipshit. But that's only if you're the fool who listens to what's actually being said. Never play defense is a strategy that looks past language to posture. The tone, the word choice, even the expressions on your faces. If you half focus your eyes and look not at the words, but at the flow of the conversation, you can see the dynamic at play. He says his short, quippy statement, and you give your detailed rebuttal. He then picks a single point from your response and attacks that as the new subject. Now, to an onlooker, the logical brain would register that he's leaving 90% of your argument on the table, and that by changing positions, he's conceding he lost the first round. But the lizard brain notices that he's always making the accusations, always in the dominant position, that he's always acting, and you're always reacting. Regardless of what is said, he displays all the outward signs of winning. So on a purely emotional level, he leaves the impression of being right. And I have never had an argument look like this that wasn't in public. This is a technique that means speaking not so much to the other person as to the people watching. Liberals tend to operate as though voters are beings of pure reason.
And like, that's the big problem with all of these arguments, right? Like, Ethan Klein is too much of a cowardly, and he's not competent enough to take on Noah's arguments and actually debate them. Neither is Destiny, right? And Destiny's also, the other thing about them is they're bad faith. Meaning you can't trust them. They are knowing liars and they don't care about the truth. So once a person has been placed in, once they have achieved bad faith, they have to then establish that they're good faith in the future, and they haven't. So the only reason we have to deal with them is they have an audience of people that enjoys being bad faith.
Do not talk about politics until it's time to make a Hassan bad video. This is the case with all of the slop tubers who shared the smear campaign. Ethan here might argue that he does have a stake in the pro-Palestine movement, as he has referred to himself as a stalwart ally to this cause.
I've been a stalwart supporter of the Palestinian cause for many years.
This raises some questions, to my mind, namely, how? What did he do to be able to bestow upon himself the label of stalwart ally? Calling yourself an ally is already, what are you doing? But in this case, especially, what are you doing? What did you do? What did he do? He donated to a fundraiser. Okay. But what if I told you that this donation was a one-time donation of what is likely less than 1% of his yearly income to a fundraiser that Hassan ran, and that this was followed by total silence on Gaza over the course of the genocide until it was time to attack Hassan with smears that originate from genocidal Zionists. And then in order to justify these actions, he would hold that donation of what is likely 1% of his yearly income over people's heads.
I've donated $6,500 to a Palestinian charity after the war started.
Hey, Ethan Klein, thank you for the dono. Ethan Klein gave $6,500. My goat.
And when I say silence, I do mean that. A search through every episode of the H3 podcast, which is Ethan's most significant form of content creation in the span between October 7th of 2023 and the release date of his content nuke, you can count the number of times Gaza is mentioned on one hand. Most of the time, it's not even brought up by Ethan. It's brought up by his producers, and then when they bring it up, barely a breath is spent on the topic. I'm not interested in handing out or revoking allyship badges, but I do think if someone is using that label on themselves while actively working against the cause, this needs to be exposed and understood so that we can stop including them in the conversation. I realize that for those of you who are already aware of how he's doing this, I'm just doing that now by talking about him, and you're welcome to criticize me for that. That's who I'm willing to listen to criticism from, people that actually care about this issue. But I do think there are a good amount of people, in his audience especially, that just can't really see what he's doing. People who might otherwise be allies to the cause are being misdirected into liberal Zionism. And I do think that's worth exploring, at least for a certain amount of time. Now, while all of this vitally important influencer discourse was going on, somewhere else in the world, there were other developments. On March 17th, Israel carpet-bombed sleeping Palestinians in Gaza at 2 a.m. in one of the most bloody massacres since the genocidal onslaught began 17 months ago. Over 400 Palestinians are confirmed to have been killed.
See, pro-Palestinian Ethan Klein, an Israeli citizen, by the way. This isn't important. He's got Hassan to deplatform. In a moment when Donald Trump is leading fascist repression of Palestinian protesters, even those who had nothing to do with any kind of violence, they were just foreign students or lawful permanent residents who joined in protests. Now Ethan Klein has no time for the free speech being trampled on in his own country. He has no time to talk about the indiscriminate bombing. By the way, a bunch of hostages were released during the ceasefire. The Houthis stopped attacking ships during the ceasefire. I thought the problem was the Houthis were irrational terrorists who just want to do violence to the international shipping. But yet, when there was a ceasefire, they stopped.
By this act of Israeli terrorism, and over 1,000 more injured. They killed more children in a single day than in any day in Israel's history. This came after 17 straight days of a complete siege on any humanitarian aid from entering Gaza. They had already been breaking the ceasefire repeatedly over 1,000 times, something which the US media continually whitewashed, but this attack was Israel's formal unilateral destruction of the ceasefire, slaughtering hundreds of starving children in their sleep. This record-breaking child-killing event was celebrated in Israeli Telegram channels with hundreds of thousands of members. In response to a video of a Palestinian girl mourning her mother that was slain by Israel, the Israelis wrote, "Cry, you whore, 1,000 whores. Cry as long as you can until we get to you too and eliminate you together with your ugly girl." To a video of a child in Gaza collecting his parents' remains, someone replied, "A young piglet vigorously collects hot and fresh litter to break the fast." The very next day after this massacre, Israel blew up a cancer hospital, the Turkish Friendship Hospital, the only hospital in Gaza specializing in treating cancer patients. They just blew the entire building up. It's rubble now. The IDF said that the hospital was a Hamas compound, but it was actually an IDF compound. They raided it at the start of the genocide, kicked everyone out, and have been using it as a military base for the past 16 months. If we're gonna make this about good and bad, generally speaking, the people blowing up cancer hospitals are not the good guys. So if this is what's gone on in the first 3 days of Israel's full breaking of the ceasefire, why am I, instead of talking about that, talking about what some idiot Zionist influencer thinks? And there's a few reasons, but first, look, the last time I framed a video about Gaza around a YouTube drama, it got over 700,000 views. That's 700,000 people that came in expecting me to talk shit about a YouTuber and left with a video that was mostly about Gaza. But when I released a video the following week with an explicitly political topic, media coverage of Israel's ceasefire violations, it barely broke 100,000 views. My perspective right now is that over everything else, we need reach. We need people to know about what Israel is doing, people that don't already know, or at least aren't seeing updates on Israel's genocide, which is a lot of people. The media is not covering it. They weren't covering it a lot before, but over the past 17 months, that coverage has dwindled down to almost nothing. And as we've seen, the majority of it is just straight up manufacturing consent. This includes that record-breaking child-killing massacre from Israel. How many of you heard about that described in those terms, the terms of what actually happened and not just another new, quote, Israeli Gaza offensive with some catastrophic record-breaking death toll that doesn't even make it into the headline? The best way, I think, to get more people to know
the number of people that have been killed in Gaza
about this stuff
is we don't know, because the entire society has been destroyed. All the hospitals, all the universities, the police stations, it's all gone. Almost every single civilian structure has been leveled. The death toll is almost certainly in the hundreds of thousands. Billions upon billions of dollars of damage done. Israel is bombing tents.
is by using the algorithm for what it's meant to be used, which is views. And in this case, what that looks like is farming drama. I could be wrong about this approach, and if you think there's better ways to go about this, then feel free to let me know in the comments. I've been thinking about lately doing something like scaling up and running the channel as a platform, but a non-profit, so that I can just cover more things more consistently and not have to choose between, a US-backed child massacre and Ethan Klein, but until then, it's going to be a bit of a mixed bag. Regardless, it doesn't matter what you think of these creators. It's not about them. It's not about anyone being good or bad or what your YouTube subscription feed says about your morals. It's about a genocide that's happening right now, that's unfolding in front of our eyes, and that most of our countries are actively supporting. If these creators are giving people rhetoric to support the genocide that's happening, then we need to talk about that. That's something we need to discuss, especially if that person is claiming to be an ally to the cause. And if other creators are fighting against it, then that's worth talking about too. If they're providing historical analysis and breaking down propaganda that's being used for the genocide, or giving an honest voice to its resistance, then that content is important and should be shared and supported regardless of how you feel about the individuals involved. Unfortunately, we're sort of stuck in a media ecosystem that cares far more about influencer drama than it does about Palestinian lives. Part of the effort here is an attempt to steer that media ecosystem and the consumers existing inside of it towards being more aware of their plight, towards caring about it, and hopefully doing something to try and stop it. So anyways, yes, I will keep using influencer drama to grab your heads and slam them against the screen to show you what Israel is doing. And if you don't like that, tell your favorite influencers to stop using their massive platforms to back a genocide. Tell them to stop spreading genocidal propaganda, lying about the resistance to it, and silencing and deplatforming advocates against the genocide. Do that, and then I'll leave you all to your slop. It's very simple. Okay, that's all for today's video.
commondreams.org, which is a highly rated, award-winning journalist website, says an indifferent media is failing to report the 400,000 dead in Gaza. This is from Ralph Nader. Only the Palestinians who are not allowed to live don't get the respect of having their deaths accurately estimated. The official Hamas count that all sides like to cite is now over 48,000 deaths. As American doctors back from Gaza before the Rafah closing last year said, just about everyone surviving in Gaza is sick, injured, or dying. They put the death estimate almost a year ago at a minimum of 95,000, not counting tens of thousands of families buried under the rubble when Israeli F-16s blew up entire apartment buildings. Why would all sides of this one-sided Israeli war of extermination rely on Hamas figures? Well, Hamas has an interest in lowballing the number of deaths to limit the rage of its inhabitants and allies abroad for not protecting the people of Gaza and not providing them with shelters. I mean, honestly, like, my feeling is they couldn't have done this, Ralph. Like, they just didn't have the capacity. They've been under blockade, man. Like, I get it. I personally, I've said this from the very beginning of the conflict. Hamas is an organization supported by the United States and Israel to create internal tension and conflict within Israel. That's it. To prevent the formation of a Palestinian polity. Like the Israelis, within Palestine. Israel literally wants Hamas to be the Gaza Strip so they can divide it away from the Palestinian Authority in occupied East Jerusalem, the Palestinian territory of the West Bank, and prevent the formation of a Palestinian state. Because the moment the Palestinians have a state, they now have the right to have a military. They now have the right to start buying air defense systems. They now have the right to form their own military and invite foreign bases. You know, imagine if China put a nice, large military base right there in the Gaza Strip and naval port. If Palestine was its own country, they would have the right to control their own foreign policy. They could absolutely invite a Chinese naval facility right in the heart of the Gaza Strip. So they don't want to have the Palestinians having their own state because they want to genocide them and they want to remove them from this territory so they can colonize it. The Israeli Superhawks want to keep the undercount low to dampen down the international rage, boycotts, and demand for more sanctions and ICC prosecutions. The Biden administration and now the Trump regime also benefit from a low number. We use the Gaza Ministry of Health figures, as does the United Nations, World Health Organization, and virtually every other humanitarian organization, while noting that independent media are not allowed to enter Gaza and the casualty counts are most certainly underreported. The Lancet report notes that based on other recent conflicts, it is not impossible to estimate that 4 times as many have died than those listed by the MOH. The time will come, I believe, when an independent accounting can be done. Is Israel going to ever allow that? Is Israel going to ever allow independent third parties to go in and assess? It seems to me that Israel is going to go in and try to remove the corpses and destroy the evidence and mass crematoria. Here it is, chat. Federal agents detain Tufts University PhD student Rumza Ozturk. Ozturk attorney says she was a Turkish national with a valid student visa. Tufts University said they had no knowledge of the incident and no information about why the student was taken into custody. Ozturk was among the authors of an op-ed for the Tufts Daily last year that called for the university to acknowledge genocide in Palestine. Ozturk's attorney has not been able to contact her client about Ozturk's whereabouts are unknown. Ozturk's attorney filed a habeas petition requesting that Ozturk not be moved out of the District of Massachusetts, which was granted by the judge Talwini Tuesday night. I mean, is Trump listening to the courts?
The police. Where are the police?
Yeah, you don't look like it. Why are you hiding your faces? Why are you hiding your faces?
So no warrant, was presented in plain clothes. This is a kidnapping. This is a kidnapping. This is not an arrest. This is a kidnapping. This is a kidnapping. This is not how arrests are done in a functioning society. This is not how arrests are done. You don't just grab people randomly off the street. You go to their residence, you present them with a warrant, and you arrest them in uniform. This is a kidnapping. This is fascism. This is Gestapo shit. Honestly, Gestapo would wear uniforms. Like this is I mean, it's actually just insane. How does one know they're not being kidnapped by randoms? I mean, they don't. And this is going to cause people to fight back, because the problem is if somebody in plain clothes comes up to you and says, "I'm police," I don't know that you're police. You know, you're a guy. I could buy a fucking, badge off the internet in 5 seconds. That's not police. You're just a guy. Until you show up uniformed with police cruisers, with, a written warrant. As far as I'm concerned, you're just a fucking kidnapper and an assaulter. That's going to, and that causes violence.
Thanks for watching. I've linked some fundraisers below. Support them if you can. Free Palestine. Goodbye.
Noah Samsen, what a king. And the slop-tuber scum really are the worst of the worst, man. They are pathetic losers, dude. Watching someone get shot and your immediate reaction being he wanted to die so he could be caught on camera is so psychotic. That's why I got in trouble for saying about the opportunity in Florida. That was the video that that was the video I was watching. Was Destiny was like, these people were trying to die cinematically for TikTok clips. I am the developer of the video game Muto was playing in the background of his video defending Asmongold. You should DMCA him for playing your video game without your consent and stealing your content. Ethan isn't going to watch the video. He's going to be open to the video, watch the first 5 seconds, pause it, and say, how dare you for 5 minutes. Yeah, Ethan is too much of a bitch to watch a Noah Samsen video. Of course he's not going to watch it. I can't imagine planning a trip to show the real South Africa during global boycott against apartheid. It's worse than that. I mean, South Africa was terrible, but they weren't literally bombing the entire an entire population of black people kept into an open air prison to do mass genocide. I mean, they did violent wars against resistance groups, but it was never on the level of just indiscriminate bombing of every building where black people lived in. They're objectively worse than South Africa. He also said no one knows who this man was, which is untrue. He was the owner of a famous children's toy store in Gaza and a very beloved man. Yeah, I know. So anyway, chat, if you're not subscribed to Noah Samsen, what are you even doing? You should support this man.